My mother's life was worth more than a business deal, Julian. While you were chasing millions, she was just chasing the memory of your name. Leo stood in the cold, marble office of the family lawyer, his clothes worn from years of hard work, facing his brother who wore a suit that cost more than their mother's hospital bed. Julian laughed, a sound like dry paper. Ambition pays the bills, Leo. Compassion just gets you a front row seat to poverty. Now, let's open that will so I can finally sell that old house and move on. Julian didn't know that in 10 minutes, his ambition was about to meet a debt he could never pay back. The glass walls of Julian's penthouse office looked out over a city that he felt he owned. At 35, Julian was the poster child for making it. His suits were Italian, his shoes were handcrafted, and his time was calculated in $1,000 increments. To Julian, life was a ladder, and he had no intention of looking down at the people he'd stepped on to get to the top. His phone buzzed on the marble desk. The caller ID read Mom. Julian glanced at it and sighed, a sound of pure annoyance. He didn't pick up. Instead, he swiped the notification away and turned back to his laptop. He had $1 million merger to close, and his mother's little problems were always the same. A leaky faucet, a lonely afternoon, or a request for a Sunday dinner he had no intention of attending. Vanessa. Julian barked into the intercom. His assistant appeared in the doorway seconds later. Yes, Mr. Vance. My mother is calling again. Send her a floral arrangement, something mid-range, nothing too flashy, and text her that I'm in a board meeting for the next 72 hours. Tell her I'll try to stop by next month. Of course, sir, Vanessa replied, scribbling in her notebook. She hesitated. She did mention last time that her hip was. I pay for her insurance, Vanessa. If her hip hurts, she can call a doctor. I'm a CEO, not a physical therapist. 6 miles away, in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the paint on the houses was tired, the atmosphere was completely different. Leo sat on the floor of his mother's small living room, a toolbox spread out around him. He had just finished a 10-hour shift delivering furniture, and his back felt like it was made of broken glass. But when he looked up and saw his mother, Martha, sitting in her favorite armchair, he forced a smile. There we go, Ma, Leo said, wiping grease from his forehead with the back of his hand. That heater won't give you any more trouble. I replaced the spark igniter. You'll stay warm tonight. Martha smiled, but her eyes wandered to the silent phone on the end table. Thank you, Leo. You're a good boy. Did Julian call you today? I tried him, but I think the reception in those big buildings must be poor. He never seems to hear it ring. Leo felt a familiar sting of protective anger, but he swallowed it. He wouldn't be the one to break her heart. You know Julian, Ma. He's probably closing a deal that's going to change the world. He's busy. But hey, I'm here. And I brought that sourdough bread you like from the bakery on 4th. You work too hard, Leo, Martha sighed, reaching out to pat his hand. Her fingers were thin and translucent, like parchment paper. 3 jobs? When do you sleep? You should be out there, finding a nice girl, building a career like your brother. I feel like a burden, keeping you here every night. Ma, listen to me, Leo said, his voice dropping to a serious, tender tone. You aren't a burden. You're my mother. Julian can have the corner office and the sports car. I'd rather have these Sunday stews and the stories about how you and Dad met. That's my wealth. Just then the front door swung open without a knock. Julian stepped in, looking like a high-fashion alien in the humble living room. He didn't take off his coat. He didn't even sit down. He stayed near the door, checking his gold watch every few seconds. Good, you're both here, Julian snapped. Leo, I saw your truck outside. It's leaking oil on the driveway. It looks like trash. It's embarrassing the neighbors. Nice to see you too, Julian, Leo said, standing up and crossing his arms. Ma was just talking about you. Julian gave a half-hearted wave to his mother. Hey, Ma. Got the flowers? Good. Listen, I've only got 5 minutes. Leo, I need to talk to you about the disappointment factor. I'm tired of people asking me what my brother does for a living and having to tell them you're a delivery boy. It's a bad look for the brand. I'm not a brand, Julian. I'm a person, Leo replied. And while you're worrying about your look, Ma's roof has a leak. Are you going to help pay for the contractor, Or should I just pick up a fourth job? Julian rolled his eyes and pulled out a slim leather wallet. He tossed $200 on the coffee table as if he were tipping a valet. There. Fix the roof. And get a haircut, Leo. You look like a failure, and frankly, it's starting to reflect on me. Without a hug, without a how are you, Julian turned and walked back out to his idling Mercedes. The room felt colder the moment he left. Martha looked at the $200 on the table. Then back at Leo, who was already picking up his tools to go check the roof. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes wasn't one of pride for the successful son. It was a deep, quiet sorrow for the man Julian had become. As the weeks turned into months, the atmosphere in the small house on the corner grew heavier. The lively scent of Martha's Sunday stews had been replaced by the sharp clinical smell of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol. Martha was fading. The hip pain she had complained about had turned into something much more aggressive, leaving her confined to a hospital bed that Leo had spent 3 weeks' wages to rent and set up in the living room. Leo had stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night. He was the invisible glue holding the house together. He would wake up at 4 a.m. to do his delivery routes, rush back at noon to feed his mother and change her bandages, and then head out again for his night security shift. His eyes were perpetually bloodshot, and his clothes hung loosely on his frame. He had lost 10 pounds, but he didn't care. To him, every breath his mother took was a victory. Julian, however, was busier than ever. His face was now on a massive digital billboard downtown, advertising his latest venture in luxury real estate. One evening, while Leo was gently dabbing Martha's forehead with a cool cloth, the front door burst open. Julian marched in, his phone pressed to his ear. He was shouting at someone on the other end about closing the escrow and not accepting excuses. He didn't even look at the bed where his mother lay, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. Julian, Leo whispered harshly. Keep it down. She just fell asleep. Julian finished his call and snapped his phone shut. He looked around the room with a sneer. This place is a morgue, Leo. It's depressing. I can't believe you're still living like this. I've already spoken to a luxury hospice facility uptown. They have 24-hour staff, high thread count sheets, and a view of the park. It's time to move her. She doesn't want to go to a facility, Julian, Leo said, his voice low and trembling with a mix of exhaustion and rage. She told me she wants to stay here. She wants to be in her home, surrounded by her things. She wants to see the tree Dad planted through the window. What she wants doesn't matter when she's not in her right mind. Julian barked, stepping toward his brother. I'm the one paying for the platinum insurance policy. Remember, I'm the one who provides the lifestyle. You're just the guy who stays here because you have nowhere else to go. Moving her is a smart business move. It frees up the house so I can put it on the market before the quarter ends. Leo stood up slowly, towering over Julian despite his fatigue. The house isn't on the market, Julian. It's her home. And as long as she's breathing, you aren't touching a single brick. You're a loser, Leo. Julian hissed. You have no vision. You're holding on to a rotting piece of wood and a dying woman because it's the only time in your life you've ever felt important. You aren't a caregiver. You're a squatter. Before Leo could respond, a soft, raspy cough came from the bed. Martha's eyes were open. She had heard everything. Julian? She whispered. Julian's face went through a brief, performative shift. He plastered on a fake, bright smile and walked to the bedside. Hey, Ma. I was just telling Leo about this great new place I found for you. You'll love it. It's much better than this dusty old house. Martha looked at her eldest son, her gaze searching his face for a flicker of genuine love. Julian. Stay for a bit? I have some tea in the kitchen. Leo can make us some. Julian checked his watch. Ma. I'd love to. Really. But I've got a dinner meeting with the city council. Big moves. I'll come back this weekend, okay? I'll send another bouquet of lilies. You like lilies, right? I like company, Julian, she said softly. Right. We'll talk soon. He patted her hand, a quick distant gesture, and was out the door before the lilies could even be ordered. The end came just 3 days later. It was a Tuesday, the same day Julian was being honored as Entrepreneur of the Year, at a black tie gala. Leo was alone in the living room when Martha's breathing changed. He knew the sound. He had researched it. He sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. I'm here, Ma, he whispered, tears finally breaking free. I'm not going anywhere. Martha looked at him, and for a split second the cloudiness in her eyes cleared. She squeezed his hand with a strength he didn't know she had left. "You stayed," she whispered. "My good son. The box. Remember the box? Leo, under the loose floorboard in the closet. Only for you." And then, she was gone. Leo sat in the silence for an hour, just holding her hand. He finally picked up the phone to call Julian. The call went straight to voicemail. Julian was on stage, receiving an award for his visionary leadership, while the woman who gave him life was being carried out of her home in a black bag. When Julian finally showed up at the hospital 2 hours later, he didn't ask how she died. He didn't ask if she suffered. He looked at Leo, who was sitting in the waiting room, covered in the dust and grief of the day, and said, "Call the funeral home. Tell them to keep it simple. No sense in wasting money on a big service. She wouldn't have wanted the fuss." He didn't wait for Leo's answer. He was already back on his phone, scrolling through the real estate listings for his mother's neighborhood. The house was finally available. It's hard to watch, isn't it? Julian is already counting the money from a house he never spent a night in during his mother's illness. He thinks he's won because he has the suit, the car, and the title. But he's about to find out that a mother's love isn't a business transaction. Have you ever seen a golden child try to take everything while the one who did the work gets nothing? Drop a justice in the comments if you're ready to see Julian get exactly what he deserves. Let's head into the lawyer's office. The law offices of Henderson and Associates were located on the 42nd floor of a glass skyscraper, the kind of place Julian felt comfortable in and the kind of place that made Leo feel like an intruder. Julian sat in the plush leather chair, crossing his legs and checking his reflection in his polished shoes. He looked like he was waiting for a merger to close, not for his mother's final wishes to be read. Leo sat across from him, wearing his only suit, that was slightly too large for him and smelled of cedar and old memories. His hands were folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on the mahogany desk. "Can we move this along?" Julian snapped as the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, entered the room. "I have a flight to Tokyo in 3 hours. Let's get to the part about the house and the liquid assets. I've already got a buyer lined up for the property, so I just need the signature." Mr. Henderson, a man who had known Martha for 30 years, looked at Julian with a cold, piercing gaze. He didn't speak immediately. He sat down, opened a thick manila folder, and adjusted his glasses. "Julian," Mr. Henderson said softly, "your mother was a very meticulous woman. She saw more than people gave her credit for. She knew that the two of you had taken very different paths in life." "Exactly," Julian smirked, glancing at Leo. "I built an empire. Leo built... Well, he built a collection of delivery routes and a very impressive debt to the electric company. Ma knew that I'm the one who can actually grow her legacy. Giving the house to Leo would be like giving a Ferrari to a toddler. He'd just crash it." Leo didn't look up. "I don't want the house to sell it, Julian. I want it because it's where Ma's heart was. It's where we grew up. It's where the height marks are still carved into the pantry door." "Emotional junk," Julian scoffed. "You can't pay a mortgage with height marks, Leo. Grow up." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, silencing the room. "The will is divided into 2 specific bequests. To my eldest son, Julian, the one who always had his eyes on the road ahead and never had time to look back. I leave my 2004 sedan. It is currently parked in the driveway of the family home. It is yours, free and clear, along with all its contents." The silence that followed was deafening. Julian's face turned a deep angry shade of purple. "The car? The 2004 sedan? Is this a joke? That car has 200,000 miles on it. The transmission slips. It's worth $500 on a good day. What about the estate? What about the savings accounts? Mr. Henderson ignored the outburst and turned to Leo. "To my youngest son, Leo, the one who stayed when the world was dark, I leave the small wooden box located under the loose floorboard in my bedroom closet, and I leave him the contents of my personal memory portfolio." Julian stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. He let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed off the glass walls. "A box. You spent 10 years playing nurse, changing bandages and skipping your own life for a wooden box? I told you, Leo. I told you that being a good son doesn't pay. I got a car, which is an insult, but you got a box of dust. All that sacrifice. All those nights sitting by her bed and she gave you a souvenir." Julian leaned over the table, his face inches from Leo's. You're a failure, Leo. Even our mother knew it. She gave the successful son the only thing with an engine, and she gave the loser a box of nothing. I'm going to go tow that piece of junk car to the scrap yard just to get the $500. Enjoy your box. Julian stormed out of the office, his expensive shoes clicking loudly on the marble floor. Leo stayed seated. He didn't look angry. He looked at the small brass key Mr. Henderson was holding out to him. She told me you'd be the one sitting here at the end, Leo, Mr. Henderson said, his voice breaking with emotion. She said Julian would leave as soon as the money wasn't mentioned. But she wanted you to have the truth. Leo took the key. It felt heavy in his hand. I didn't do it for the money, Mr. Henderson. I just wanted her to not be alone. I know, Leo. And that is exactly why she did what she did. Julian drove his sleek silver Mercedes toward the old neighborhood, the engine purring with a perfection that seemed to mock the dilapidated houses passing by. He was fuming. His grip on the steering wheel was so tight, his knuckles were white. $500, he hissed to himself. A 20-year-old sedan. After all the Entrepreneur of the Year awards, after all the prestige, she leaves me a piece of junk. She probably went senile at the end. That's the only explanation. He pulled into the driveway of the family home. The grass was slightly overgrown and the house looked smaller than he remembered. Sitting there, covered in a thin layer of dust and pollen, was the 2004 sedan. It looked pathetic compared to his luxury car. Julian stepped out, the humidity of the afternoon clinging to his expensive suit. He walked up to the old car and pressed the unlock button on the key fob Mr. Henderson had given him. The car let out a weak, dying chirp. Disgusting, Julian muttered. He didn't even want to sit in the driver's seat. He went straight to the back. Let's see if there's at least a spare tire worth selling. He popped the trunk. It didn't contain a spare tire. It didn't contain tools. The trunk was packed, completely filled to the brim, with neat stacks of yellow and white envelopes. Hundreds of them. Julian's brow furrowed. He reached in and grabbed a handful. As he looked at the first one, his heart skipped a beat. It was an electric bill from 3 years ago. It was addressed to Martha, but across the top, in thick red marker, were the words, "Urgent disconnection notice." Pinned to the bill was a small, sticky note in his mother's shaky, elegant handwriting. June 12th. Called Julian today. His assistant said he was in a closed-door meeting and couldn't be disturbed. He didn't call back. Leo worked an extra shift at the warehouse to pay this, so the fridge wouldn't turn off. God bless my Leo. Julian felt a cold shiver, but he pushed it aside, his ego fighting for air. He grabbed another stack. Property taxes, August 15th. The city says I'm behind. I asked Julian if he could look at the paperwork. He told me to stop worrying about things I don't understand. Leo sold his old guitar to cover the first installment. I cried tonight. He began digging frantically through the piles, his expensive silk tie dipping into the dust of the trunk. Every single envelope told the same story. Medical bills. Julian said he'd look into it. Never heard back. Roof repairs. Julian sent $200. The repair cost $2,000. Leo worked 3 nights straight as a security guard to make up the difference. Grocery receipts. Julian sent flowers. I can't eat flowers. Leo brought eggs and milk. The weight of the paper felt like lead in Julian's hands. He realized that for the last decade, while he was showing off his success, his mother was drowning. And every time she reached out to the golden sun, he had swiped her away like a notification on his phone. At the very bottom of the trunk was a large, heavy ledger. Julian opened it. It was a meticulous record of every cent Leo had spent to keep Martha alive and in her home. The total was staggering, tens of thousands of dollars. Money Leo didn't have. Money he had bled for while Julian was buying Rolexes. Taped to the final page of the ledger was a legal document from the estate lawyer. Julian's eyes scanned the fine print, and his blood turned to ice. Because Julian had formally accepted the inheritance of the vehicle and its contents at the lawyer's office, he had legally agreed to settle the outstanding liabilities of the estate attached to that specific asset. Martha had legally transferred all her personal debts, the ones Leo had been quietly carrying, into Julian's name upon his acceptance of the car. Julian wasn't just left with a junk car. He was now legally responsible for every unpaid cent of his mother's life, including the interest. She trapped me, Julian whispered, his voice cracking. He looked up at the silent house, feeling for the first time in his life like the smallest man in the world. She didn't leave me a car. She left me a mirror. He slumped against the rusted bumper of the 2004 sedan, surrounded by the paper trail of his own neglect. The golden sun was finally seeing the cost of his gold. While Julian sat in the dirt of the driveway, buried under a mountain of his own neglected responsibilities, Leo was back in the quiet, mahogany-lined sanctuary of Mr. Henderson's office. The small wooden box sat on the desk between them, looking humble and weathered, much like Leo himself. "Go ahead, Leo," Mr. Henderson encouraged with a soft smile. "It's been waiting for you." Leo's hands, calloused from years of manual labor and gentle caregiving, trembled as he inserted the small brass key. The lock turned with a satisfying, metallic click. He lifted the lid, expecting to find a few faded photographs or perhaps his father's old silver pocket watch. Instead, the first thing he saw was a single gold-colored key attached to a heavy key fob, and beneath it a thick stack of legal deeds bound in a blue ribbon. "Your mother wasn't the simple housewife everyone thought she was," Leo Mr. Henderson began, leaning forward. "Your grandfather was a pioneer in commercial real estate, and Martha was his only partner. She didn't just inherit his money, she inherited his mind for the market. For 40 years, she quietly managed a syndicate of properties downtown, apartment complexes, medical suites, and a retail plaza." Leo stared at the deeds, his mind racing. "But she lived so simply. We struggled for groceries. I worked 3 jobs to keep the lights on. Why didn't she just use this?" "Because she was a mother, Leo," the lawyer said, his voice thick with emotion. She watched Julian turn into a man who worshipped the image of wealth rather than the substance of it. She saw him become someone who valued people only for what they could do for him. She knew that if she revealed her true net worth, Julian would have swept in, taken control, and left her in a luxury facility to rot while he spent the principal. He gestured to the box. "She lived on a fixed income and let you help her because she wanted to see who would stay when there was nothing to gain. She needed to know which of her sons had a heart that couldn't be bought. Every time you worked a double shift to pay her taxes, you weren't just paying a bill, Leo. You were proving that you were the only one worthy of the kingdom." The memory portfolio wasn't just money. It was a portfolio of assets worth over $6 million. It was a life of absolute security, a reward for the man who had given up his own security to provide it for another. "There's one more thing," Mr. Henderson added. "The deeds are held in a private trust. By the time Julian realizes that he's legally obligated to pay back every cent of the debt he ignored, he'll find that he can't sue you for a portion of this. It's ironclad. Martha made sure that the man who wanted everything got the debt, and the man who wanted nothing but his mother's love got everything else." Leo picked up the gold key. It didn't feel like a prize. It felt like a heavy responsibility. He didn't think about Ferraris or penthouses. He thought about the senior center in the neighborhood that was about to close down. He thought about the grocery store clerk who was struggling to pay for her mother's insulin. Months later, the golden child Julian was forced to sell his silver Mercedes and his penthouse just to cover the legal settlements and the back taxes found in the trunk of that 2004 sedan. He was left with exactly what he gave his mother: a cold, empty house, and a phone that didn't ring. Leo, however, stood in front of a brand new building downtown. It wasn't a luxury hotel or a corporate tower. It was the Martha Vance Center for Dignified Aging, a place where no parent would ever be treated like a line item, and where loyalty was the only currency that mattered. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "I kept the box, Ma. But you were always the real treasure, the meaning. You cannot inherit a blessing from a heart you never cared for. True wealth is not found in the balance of your bank account, but in the people who are willing to stand by your bed when the account is empty. Don't build a life so big that there's no room for the people who gave it to you." Julian thought he was the smartest man in the room, but he forgot that the most important assets in life don't have a price tag. He traded his mother's love for a business deal, and in the end, the deal went bust. Have you ever known someone who was the Leo of their family, the one who did all the work while the golden child got all the praise? Or maybe you've realized that you need to make a phone call to someone you've been too busy for lately. Tell us your story in the comments. Let's start a conversation about what truly matters. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and share this with someone who needs a reminder to prioritize their family. And for more stories that find the meaning in every moment, hit subscribe to Moments and Meanings by Anne. This is Moments and Meanings by Anne. Until next time, remember, your character is the only thing you truly take with you.